over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. I posted all 30 of my MLB season win totals yesterday, so please head on over there and check those out. Also, we've got conference tournament previews for 11 of the 12 conference tournaments going this week that haven't started yet. The America East has some final regular season games tonight, so we'll write that one up tomorrow. But we'll cover all 32 conference tournaments over at BangTheBook.com as well, so you can be on the lookout for that. Daily college basketball picks from Kyle Hunter, daily NHL picks from Parker Michaels. All of our writers continue to do a phenomenal job, so please check out everything that they have to offer over there as well. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Two guests on the program here today as we start things off with professional handicapper Rolf Michaels from WagerTalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
Adam, going great. Thanks for having me on. And it really is, to me, the most exciting time of the year. Everyone talks about the tournament, but, after 2 days, half the field is gone. With conference tournaments, you have back-to-back-to-back days of just pure excitement and even more of a Cinderella situation where teams can make the tournament as a rare occurrence.
Definitely looking forward to conference tournaments. And for anybody that's going out to Vegas for March Madness, I recommend conference tournament week. It's going to be cheaper. You're not paying the markup for the hotels. And also, you're going to have more room to move around the sports books because everybody celebrates that first weekend of March Madness. But here, with conference tournaments, still all-day basketball, all-day betting opportunities without the same fanfare and hoopla. And, of course, next week, the St. Patrick's weekend as well. So you can get a little bit crazy out there. But, Rolf, in any event, before we talk some conference tournament stuff, a lot of conferences, 19 of them to be exact, finishing up the regular season this week. So what sorts of betting angles are you looking at for those conferences?
Well, they vary so much. There's some conferences where you're in. You don't need to put out that max effort. You have conferences that you have a rare bullseye on your back. The Big 12, for example, Kansas having been the champion for 14 years, you see teams with Texas Tech and Kansas State that are now leading the conference. I thought they might be a little tight, on Monday night, Big Monday, where both of them got their wins and continued to do that. So, again, the situations are just some teams are playing for pride. Some teams are playing to get to the 500 mark. You and I talk about that often. You have a team that's in that 14-14 range or 15-15 range. Having a winning regular season is something that sticks on your media guide for the rest of your lives. And then some teams, like Duke, who it doesn't matter if they win their title, they're going to be a 1 seed. Worst case, they're going to be a 2 seed. They really don't have to put max effort out. So there's multiple things to look at. Each vary from conference to conference. And it really does give you value picking and choosing where you can find those extra tidbits of value.
Well, and you certainly want to look historically, I think, as well, because you look at a team like Duke, for example, that you just referenced. Duke is a team that traditionally, they don't really worry about anything until the NCAA tournament. They've got one conference tournament title since 2011. That was in 2017. Haven't won the ACC regular season title since 2010. Maybe that becomes a sticking point the longer you go with that drought. But Duke is a team built for the tournament. They know it. Everybody knows it. Mike Krzyzewski doesn't push it, whereas other teams, they may use that banner as a motivating factor, and you want to keep those teams in mind here at this time of the year for sure.
Absolutely. A couple teams to bring to mind that haven't been regulars at the top of the standings. Marquette was ahead of Villanova by a game and a half. They lose to Villanova last Wednesday, and then they lose at home as a home favorite to Creighton, carrying it over. Houston, another team that's not used to being clear on top of the conference. Houston loses at home to UCF. So you have pressure on those teams that are trying to win the regular season title, aren't accustomed to having the bullseye on their back, and have faltered a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Those are definitely things you want to keep in mind. And one other thing I want to touch on here real quickly, we teased this a little bit last week, but I know there are some things in terms of the records that you look at here as a good motivating betting angle this week.
Adam, you and I talk in football, teams that get to that 6-6 mark and have a winning regular season or get to 10 wins in football. Well, the same thing applies in basketball. Obvious 20 wins is a benchmark, but don't discount those teams. They're at the 14-15 record or 15-15 or 16-15. Having a winning record moving forward is your legacy. Having that winning record in the media guide is something that's going to live with you forever. And even times where 10 wins can be important. I'll tell you what, I still go to the game notes for each school. By reading the first page in the game notes, those SIDs do a great job. They let you know if this win is important to reach some mark or reach some record, be it a winning record in conference play, be it a certain number of wins. If the game is important historically for the SID and the game notes, you can be sure that the coach and the players are aware of reaching that mark as well.
Definitely a lot of good considerations here at this time of the year for these conferences that are wrapping up the regular season. So let's transition into talking about conference tournaments here, because obviously that's what everybody wants to know about, with a lot of berths on the line for the NCAA tournament, a lot of good betting angles with the back-to-backs and neutral sites and so many other different things. What are some things that you've kind of picked up on, Rolf, in terms of looking at these conference tournaments?
Well, how many times in the next 2 weeks, Adam, are we going to hear it's tough to beat a team for a third straight time? Well, let me just put that to rest right now. The database goes back to 2002, so we have 16 years of data. Teams playing for a third time in the season that lost the first two games are 651 and 632, 50.7%. Since 2015, they're 177 and 176, only one game off from 345 games. So don't worry at all if your team's won the first two games or lost the last two games. Also, teams that have lost 4 straight games, got swept back-to-back years, we start to see some series dominance. Well, the team that has beaten that full 4 straight years actually is a little bit of a negative, but only by 2.2%. They're 242 and 264, 47.8%. So again, don't let it affect your handicapping one way or the other. Now, there are situations where you look at where a team's playing Virginia, doesn't shoot to 3 well, can't shoot to 2 very well, and they struggle against the zone. That's a matchup situation. That's not a historical situation of losing 2 games and you can't lose a third straight.
And that's one of the things I love about the database and about the work that you do, Rolf, is that, we always hear these things, or we believe these things, or we think these things to be true. Getting the chance to quantify them is so very important. And again, like you said, you're going to hear it a ton, and we're going to talk about it in this show in the sense that it means absolutely nothing for us. But a lot of people are going to say, well, it's so hard to beat a team 3 times in a year. I mean, no, not if you're the better team, not if you're structured in a way that's a bad matchup for that other team. It really has no bearing for me, but a lot of people like to latch onto those cliches and narratives in the month of March.
Yeah, a couple other situations I just want to bring up now, because there'll be some conference games going on this weekend that we won't be talking about before we get on the show again. Teams that are playing with no rest and a double-digit favorite, that means they're at least their second game into the tournament. Obviously, you have rest playing in the opener, and you have some big favorites in the openers, but those teams playing in the second day of a tournament or later as a double-digit favorite, only 20 and 26, 43%. So, we're used to seeing big lines game day 1, but day 2, if you're playing multiple days and you're a double-digit favorite, it's been a negative. And one of my favorite play-ons are teams that are horrible during the regular season and they're a huge favorite. If you're going to take anything out of this show, it's this. Tend to play big dogs. Why? Because you have an opponent that knows they're a better team. You have an opponent that knows they have to play the next day. When you have these big leads, know you're going to play the next day, you don't care how much you beat an opponent by. No one talks about that game. In 24 hours, there's a new box score in your history that's going to dictate what you do moving forward. But teams that have a win percentage of 20% or less. So you are talking the worst 10% of teams in college basketball that had lost at home. So this team knows they can beat the worst team on the road, and they're a double-digit road dog. They are 225 and 148, 60.3%. So those teams, double-digit dogs that lost at home in their previous meeting against this opponent, have covered 60.3% of the time. Kennesaw State did it last night. They covered a 24-point spread. I think they lost by 14, in the opening night of conference play. So just something to keep moving forward as you're looking at. And it makes perfect sense. A 25-point win doesn't get you anything. Rest knowing you play a much better team tomorrow is the most important thought you should have.
Yeah, and it's funny because we talked about that a little bit with Brian Blessing on yesterday's show. Also looking at it in the sense that, in these first games of the conference tournaments, and you're blowing out some vastly inferior team, you may be emptying the bench a little bit. You may be letting some guys play that generally don't get the chance to play. And while you may let them play on the offensive end, they're also going to struggle on the defensive end a little bit too, which is why the back door kind of opens up, why you may see some higher scoring late game situations there. So many considerations in conference tournaments. And again, this is unique really to the college basketball season in the month of March, except for those early season non-conference tournaments where, coaches are still trying to figure their teams out a little bit. This is a time of the year that we don't see in the regular season with no rest, with, some substantially big lines. And also too, you got a team that's a big underdog. That's their last chance, and they know it. And so they're going to leave everything out there if they want to play in that game. That's a consideration as well.
And for the most part, when you're playing these early games, you're very lethargic. You're playing at a unique time. You're playing at a unique setting where you're not warming up to your normal routine. A game's going on before. You run out for a few minutes of practice. You're playing in front of a crowd you're not accustomed to. You probably are only 30% full. You have fans. They have some fans. There's some neutral fans there. So throw all of those unique situations into the mix. And again, knowing that you have to play in the next 24 hours, again, there's no reason to run up that score.
Now, here's something I'd be kind of curious to get your thoughts on, Rolf. You go from, especially in the really low major conferences here, you play these home games to start things off. Then you go and play in a neutral site. The MAC does this. The Horizon League does this. What kind of impact do you think that has? Going from playing, your last collegiate game at home if you're a senior to unless you get to the, CBI or the CIT and you play at home, to then going to a neutral site. I'm kind of curious the dynamics of that, you think?
Well, I remember reading, having gone to those MAC games in Cleveland when they were at the Gund or the Q, that teams were excited to go to Cleveland because it means you advanced. It means you got through those first two stages. The Horizon plays tonight on Tuesday, then tomorrow on Wednesday, and then they don't play again till next Monday, Tuesday. So it's a situation where you can sell tickets. You can make the advancement. You're playing in a place where LeBron played. And to me, I think there's some excitement, and it adds something to the tournament because it's the top teams. Everybody's not there. Your fans know you're only a couple wins away from making the NCAA tournament. So for the Horizon situation, I like it. We've seen some situations with, the MAC, the same thing. You talked about the MAC. They play Monday. And again, I talked to the MAC, confusing the MAC and the Horizon, excuse me. The Horizon obviously is playing at Detroit. The MAC is at the Q. It's the MAC, the same thing. You play your games on Monday, then you move forward. So in those situations, I think the better teams are advancing. The better teams know they're close. The better teams are playing in these bigger arenas with a chance to move forward and still alive for the dance. So I think it gives the more mature team, the team with couple shooters, because anyone can have an off day in a big arena. If you have multiple shooters, I really like looking for those teams with multiple shooters going to those large cavernous places where they normally aren't accustomed to.
All right, so as we look at some specific conference tournaments here to sort of look at some of the angles that you're considering, for those that don't know, we started on Blog Talk Radio, got through about 15 minutes, and then the shit hit the fan and everything went nuts. So I do have a little bit of an idea what Rolf wants to talk about here today. And one of the conferences that that we had addressed specifically was the Missouri Valley. And you were looking at that both from an odds standpoint and just also the nature of that tournament to where you think that there's some value in the Mo Valley.
Well, you have Loyola, and they've had the biggest bullseye on their back of any team in any conference the entire year. The entire conference was just inundated with Loyola publicity last year, and well-deserved. Well, now you see Drake and Loyola at 12-6, and with the exception of Evansville, that's 5-13, and 11, you only have a 5.5 game lead from top to bottom. But if you look at the college basketball guide I do, where one full page is broken out per conference, the leading team is Loyola at plus 3.9 points per game in conference play. You can't find a closer conference than that. When your best team is only plus 3.9 points per game, your worst team is Evansville, minus 4.8 points per game. So you only have an 8.7 points per game diff from top to bottom. I mean, you have a 14-point gap from the first place to the second place with Gonzaga and St. Mary's. So to me, it's a conference that's wide open. I see Northern Iowa with some nice odds there. And they're a team that struggles offensively, but playing in this neutral setting, Northern Iowa is a team I keep my eye on. One note that had been money for probably 12 straight years, I love what the Missouri Valley Conference does, is they have 2 play-in games the night before the rest of the tournament starts, and the team that plays the last game on Wednesday or Thursday, whatever night it is, has to play the number 1 seed noon the next day. So they have a 12-hour turnaround against a rested best team in the conference. I love that they give their number 1 seed that type of advantage. I think you should do. That number 1 seed had covered, I think, 12 straight years. It's been priced so high the last 2 years that it's actually not covered, but it's a situation I'll still look at depending on where the line is.
Well, we'll talk about the Missouri Valley here in our next segment with Kyle Hunter. That's also a stone cold under conference tournament in St. Louis. But, Rolf, when it comes to the conference tournaments, I mean, are you playing a fair amount of these futures, or are you just looking to pick off these spots on a game-by-game basis, or some of both?
I am really not playing the futures just because the futures are slanted towards the casinos because they just come up with some random number that they're going to make the favorite and they're going to extend the odds. If there were 10,000 people betting and for them to break even, those wouldn't be the odds. The only way you're going to get true value with futures is if you can say this team is a 2-1 favorite, but I want to lay 3-1. They're not going to win the tournament. Well, nobody offers that. It would be silly to offer that because you would bet nose on so many teams that you wouldn't be able to make money. So, I do bet a team to win the NCAA tournament. Obviously, that's fun. But unless I'm really picking a spot where I can get a team that, is getting 7, 8, 9, 10, or 1 that I like, I really don't play many futures for that reason.
All right. Well, I guess the last thing to do here, and again, it's been kind of a strange morning having to restart the segment and all that type of thing here. So, I guess let's go ahead and take a look at your situational and tactical plays for the week here, because as we talked about, conference is still going through the end of the regular season, or maybe there's a technical play from a conference tournament you like.
There's 4 games I want to bring up. The first is just an interesting thing that I found on the database playing around this morning. I am not going to play it because of this angle, but it's just something to think about. As I said, the database I use, killersports.com, goes back to 2002 in college basketball. Well, teams with 26 or more wins off a straight-up loss, and now they're an away favorite. That's Nevada tonight. We also know how emotional they are off that loss and how pissed off they are. Those teams are 9-0 ATS. It's only happened 9 times. There aren't many teams that get to 26 wins. So teams with 26 or more wins off a straight up loss, and now they're an away favorite, 9-0 against the spread with an impressive average cover of 8.5 points per game. And that's something, again, just we talk about trends and angles here and there's they're fun. There's something that I still don't base a play on, but people like hearing them. But you still have to pay attention when you have an angle. If you have a 6-1 angle with an average cover margin of 10 points, that's a legitimate angle to look at. If you have a 6-1 angle with an average cover of 2.2 points per game, that means one basket either way, you could have a 1-6 ATS record. So even when we talk angles, you have to delve deeper to make sure or look how strong that angle is by the average margin of cover.
I like that one. That's very interesting. And I like the way that you justified it as well, saying that, we talk about how not every number matters the same from a betting standpoint. There are different key numbers and things like that. Not every trend can be qualified in the same way either. And as you said, a trend where it's barely winning is one thing. A trend where it's comfortably winning is another.
Absolutely. Transitioning to the technical play, this is just two teams in heading in opposite directions. And it's Central Michigan is 9-2 ATS their last 11, plain and simple. Northern Illinois 1-7 their last 8. So while people sometimes say, "Oh, you can't look at trends," and I'm not going to base a play on a trend or an angle, but really when you have a simple situational trend, you're just looking at how that team has played against Vegas expectations. One team has played well against Vegas expectations, exceeded them. One team has played poorly and faltered. So again, a crisp, clean technical situation. Central Michigan 9-2, Northern Illinois 1-7, both against the spread.
Well, of course, at this time of the year too, you run into situations where for Northern Illinois, slumping a little bit, struggling a little bit, they've lost 7 of their last 8, it looks like here. What is their incentive? Because again, they're a team that it's up to the conference tournament. And when you're in a one-bid league like they are, those are angles you want to look at. A team that's struggling at the end of the regular season, they already have their eyes on that conference tournament, and that's that.
Well, especially, let me add one more point, is when you're past senior night. Northern Illinois just had their senior night against Eastern Michigan. They lost by 6. So now they're ending with 2 road games. To them, I really truly believe their season is over. If you are playing that last home game, you have multiple seniors on the team. Those are games that can sometimes be special, can sometimes make a rallying point for a team, especially if you hang in earlier. I look to live bet. If I have a nice sized dog that's close at halftime and at home in the senior night, and they have the right type of seniors playing, I often look to live bet those teams because the crowd really gets into it. I don't know if Texas Tech last night was blowing out Texas. So what do? They empty the bench and they want their seniors to shoot the ball, and the bench is screaming for the seniors to shoot. And when those type of seniors make those shots, the crowd explodes. The bench is going nuts. You never see a bench more vocal than on senior night when you have that type of lead or you're playing well and you get the seniors that have been bench warmers and very important practice players the entire season finally get to perform under the big lights and score and make the box score. It's a very special feeling.
Well, and I guess one last point to make here, you look at what happened with that Cal State Fullerton Cal Poly game at the end on February 28th, where the team manager gets to come in, gets to play, handles the ball, drives the lane, gets the and one. They win that game by 11. Maybe a little bit of an emotional letdown in the next game on the road against UC Davis, lose that game by 7. Again, these little memorable moments, like a senior night, like some team manager coming off the bench or whatever, it's a huge emotional. That emotional balloon kind of pops a little bit for that next game because you're so late in the season, and especially if it's on the road.
Absolutely. And, just because it's so fresh in our minds, and Nevada may very well play Utah State in the Mountain West Finals. But if they don't, those same type of negative situations that Nevada has going at Utah State, that's something you want to mark your calendar for next year's, because you may not remember it. That was so publicized, you may remember it. But there's been some couple situations, Portland State and Southern Utah, where they got in a huge scuffle at the end of the game. And what happened? Portland State was a home dog in the rematch, and they took care of them. 2 or 3 situations this year, I remember, where there's been scuffles, and the team that felt they were shied or didn't get the protection or were on the road and just were very displeased, they remember those games, and they tend to come out and play very hard in those next games.
There was a game like that last year. I think it was Fort Wayne in the Summit League. They got into some kind of disagreement after the game. The opposition was stomping on the midcourt logo, something like that. They played them again. This could have been 2 years ago. I don't remember. They played them again, and they beat the shit out of them. I mean, it was that rallying point game where that was all that they were worried about, and they completely rolled that team. So I agree. Those are spots that you definitely want to keep in mind for the future. Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com. What's going on over there right now, Rolf?
You know, you have the there's a quick to read guide for the conference tournaments. There's the NBA stat sheet, which is off to a couple more back-to-back-to-back winners. There's the weekly college basketball guide and the weekly logs for the new football league. If you want to find those teams that are 4-0 against the spread or those teams that tend to go under, it's a quick read on a one-page guide.
You can follow Rolf on Twitter at CalSportsLV. Rolf Michaels, wagertalk.com. Appreciate the time. Appreciate your patience and your flexibility here with the technical issues that we had. We'll talk to you again next week, man.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.